Stephen A., let's get your thoughts. Is this a good fit, Rockets and CP3?
Well, first of all, I don't think CP3 is a bad fit for any team. Let me be very, very clear. I find him to be one of the elite floor orchestrators and floor generals the game has ever seen. I think he's that special of a talent. What I will say to you, however, is this going to get them over the hump in the West? Absolutely not. There's a couple of pieces that they need. It's why they're on Melo's list. Melo would accept the buyout from, to go to the Cleveland Cavaliers. He'll need a trade in his mind in order to end up in Houston, from what I'm hearing. And who knows where else they're going to go. You got Paul George talking about Boston as opposed to Houston. It remains to be seen what Houston will be able to do to try to get their hands on somebody like that, because they certainly need a third wheel. What you have to look at is the combination of Chris Paul with the James Harden. James Harden averaged 29, 11, and 8. The dude was sensational. The flip side to it is that he looked absolutely exhausted because he had on-ball responsibilities. Now that Chris Paul is going to be on there, you're going to have an elite point guard on the floor at all times. Where it gets tricky, Max, is the kind of stuff that you've been hearing. And we all know how fond I am of Chris Paul, not just as a player, but as a person. But the fact of the matter is you do have people that have questioned his leadership inside the locker room and what kind of effect that has had on the team. If you're looking at a James Harden who may need that leadership, if you're looking at Mike D'Antoni, who ingratiates himself with players very, very well, but it's primarily because he doesn't force them to play defense but so much. Chris Paul defends. James Harden does not. So on the offensive side of the ball, there will be no problems. But if James Harden is lackadaisical on defense, how receptive is Chris Paul going to be to that? Those are the questions. But in the end, I'm going to say it's a plus more so than a minus, enough to get them to the Western Conference Finals, where they'd lose to Golden State. And that's if they can get past San Antonio.
First of all, whether it works or not, I think the answer is yes, ultimately, because for all the tactical problems you see there, they're both very high usage players. They both like to dribble a lot. D'Antoni got James Harden to give up the ball earlier in the shot clock and move the ball. It's more fluid now, the offense. Can he also do that for Chris Paul? And then what does that mean for James Harden? All those things. These guys sought this out. Chris Paul and James Harden sought this out, so they're incentivized to make this work.
Okay.
Here's the thing about Chris Paul. I agree with you. One of the greatest floor generals of all time, it looks like, because when you watch play after play, go, yes, that was right, that was right. He always makes the correct play, and yet somehow the whole on every team he's been on seems to be less than the sum of its parts. You would think with a guy like that it'd be more, and what the only conclusion I can reach is what you say that everyone's heard. There seems to be a joylessness about the teams he plays on. They don't seem to be having fun, and it's like you're playing NBA basketball for a living, and you're awesome at it, and Chris Paul is the point guard. Why isn't everyone having a better time? Now, you don't have to have a great time. Kobe Bryant teams always weren't in love with each other, but they won. I want to hear this, but 1 second. The Warriors, I want to address what Daryl Morey said about it's a weapons race. Either you're in the race or you're on the sidelines. Exactly right. It's what Dr. Jerry Buss, the late great owner of the Lakers, greatest owner in the history of American team sports, I think by far, told Kobe Bryant when Kobe wanted a trade. He said, Kobe, I'm not going to trade a 5-carat diamond for 5 1-carat diamonds. That's the nature of the NBA. Always trade up. Don't get the best player in the trade. There are a handful, 10, 12 players who are different from everybody else. All those other people are complementary pieces. They're ancillary. If you don't have one of those 5 or 10 or 12 guys, forget it. You ain't winning a chip. So Daryl Morey's absolutely right about that, and that's what's most important here. But I would say, look at what the Warriors have done. The Warriors, through scouting and player development, have found at the 7th pick, at the 11th pick, at the 35th pick players that they have then developed into weapons, right? No other team, maybe the Spurs with Kawhi, 1 or 2 other examples, is really doing that. So Daryl Morey here may be behind the times strategically from that point of view. Let me grab one of these guys who already exists. It may be better to find them and develop them yourself.
Yeah, definitely it may be better to find them and develop them yourself. And we obviously look at the Warriors with the draft, but don't act like there was brilliance there. They lucked up. Everybody knew that Steph Curry was going to be this kind of shooter. Maybe not the kind of player, but they knew he could shoot the basketball.
6 other teams didn't take him.
Well, the New York Knicks, you got to look at the teams that were picked before them, but clearly people dropped the ball. But the New York Knicks were clearly going to draft him at number 8. Don't get me depressed.
Clay went 11.
I'm in a good mood. Don't get me depressed.
Draymond went 35.
Don't get me depressed. But let me get back to Chris Paul, because here's where Chris Paul can be a bad seed for an executive or coach. Chris Paul is fixated on winning. He's a 9-time All-Star. Nobody in the history of the NBA has had more All-Star appearances without making a conference finals. Only Dominique Wilkins is tied with him. Chris Paul loves winning. He hates losing. He is not mellow about it. He wears it on his sleeve. He's a pit bull coming at you, and it makes him sick to his stomach that he's losing. So if you are Houston and you are content, like Daryl Morey said, well, you know what? We've had more regular season wins than most teams, and nobody give a damn about that. The bottom line is you're supposed to be going for the chip. Is this going for the chip? See, that's the question mark in all of this, because I don't know if it's going for the chip. You still need an additional piece. As great as Chris Paul is, as great as James Harden is, it is clearly not enough.
But I think what Morey is saying,
he's got to do that.
You're right.
Chris Paul is not going to sit idly by and take losing. That's not who he is.
It's not enough. But what Daryl Morey is really saying is, look, whether or not you believe it's the perfect fit, Chris Paul is one of those guys.
Yes, he is.
James Harden's one of those guys. So if you have a chance to get one of those guys, it doesn't matter. Well, I already have a point guard, or I already have a center, I already have a power forward. That's another guy just like that. Never mind that. Get one of those guys. If you can get 2 of them, even better. If you can get 3 of them, best of all. That's what Daryl Morey is saying. Whether or not you think it'll fit and work, we think it'll work because they're both very smart and they're both great players. The bottom line is that's who is available.
Not only that, here's where Daryl Morey has to be applauded. I can't sit here and be a hypocrite and in one breath look at a Phil Jackson and lament the fact that you never used your cachet to get marquee dudes to your city. In other words, anybody can stick up the joint and just accumulate high draft picks. Phil Jackson was one person that was hell-bent on trying to do that. Daryl Morey goes out there, ingratiates himself with the decision makers to ingratiate himself with those players, which will ultimately lure them to Houston. He did it with James Harden. He did it with Dwight Howard. He's done it now with Chris Paul.
Caveat.
He might not be finished. I give him credit for that.
One caveat about
He's
all
doing
of this,
his job.
They're not as good as the Warriors, but Daryl Morey said it last year, as I mentioned.
But
they
they're
shoot
trying.
so many threes. They have a puncher's chance, and they just got better.